Alright, welcome back to part 3. As you may have noticed, I look different now. There has been quite a bunch of time between part 2 and this part, which is also why this is coming out so late. I was and am still fairly sick. I still have a lot of coughing going on and sore throat, but not that bad that I can't at least try to finish the series now. But before it was just pretty bad for like this long, intense talking in like one swoop. But yeah, now we're finally back again, so let's continue. So first off, we have Elo's Choice. Card is decent. It's basically what Plague should have been, and it has an upside, but comes with two factions. This might be an interesting card in Constructed theoretically. Practically, I don't really see an application for it right now, but it's a decent card in terms of cost to effect, and nice to exist, and if a deck or metagame asks for it. But the effects are both like kind of narrow. One is a better version of gaining 3 health basically, that has some synergy with weapons, and the other one is a super mini sweeper that also permanently cripples stuff. So yeah, currently I don't really see an application for it in any of the two formats. And in Limited, seems decent, but also not that great. Then again, Plague was pretty strong in Limited at times, so you're probably gonna main deck this if you're into colors. Next we have Elos Elite. Yeah, 2 cost, 1/4 in Throne. This sometimes ends up in some of the even Paladin decks, but there's not a lot of Decimate going on in even Paladin because you basically only have the emblems, so it's not that great there. In non-even Paladins, there are a lot of better 2-drops, so it's hard to justify this, although if you want to like aggressively decimate, you probably want it. In Limited, 2 cost, 1/4 with a bit of an upside is pretty decent if it's in your colors. So, and in Expedition, Ardenport isn't much of a deck, especially one built around these Paladins, I think, so it's not super relevant. Next we have Cast into Shadow. This card's pretty good. First of all, being able to also hit curses is really nice. Stuff like Permafrost especially, but also a couple of other more fringe curses that come from units and other cards. And yeah, basically a 3-cost Annihilate that has the upside of hitting curses and being able to 2-for-1 the opponent, or like 2-for-2 the opponent, and gain some tempo by, I don't know, killing a blue unit and a Permafrost, or just 2 units. Keep in mind the units have to share the same single faction, so you can't like kill a time unit and a primal unit, even though they would both be annihilatable. So yeah, especially in Expedition, pretty good removal due to the overall more expensive removal and lower quality of removal. But even in Throne, this is pretty solid, at least as like a market card, since it's pretty flexible and can be a huge blowout. If you play multiples, the upside of the Decimate is lower because you can't decimate that easily multiple times and aggressively. And in Limited, I mean, it's a good removal, so it's a pretty strong card. Next we have Nivea, Most Devoted. She's supposed to go into the like Decimate Paladin deck, the non-even one. The 4-cost 4/4, and when you decimate, your Paladins get +1/+1, and if you mastery 20, you basically get a one-sided Armageddon for any Magic players, or just you destroy the opponent's power and set them to 0 power. So yeah, the card is kind of nice, but a bit on the underpowered side, I would say, these days, especially in Throne, where the card is more supportable, and in Expedition, I think there's just not enough Paladin support and stuff to really make this worth it, at least not to make it competitive, so a bit of an awkward spot. In Limited, however, aside from the bit restrictive influence requirements, a 4-cost 4/4 with some potential upside is pretty good. Then we have Elos, Martial Scholar, the 6 influence Ardent Port card. Yeah, 6 cost 3/5, endurance unblockable, so offense defense kind of unit. And on summon, set each other unit's attack to 3. The idea is obviously to have units like Elos Elite and stuff that benefit from this, while you cripple the opponent's board a bunch and make them line up better against yours, or even worse because you have these 3/4s and 3/5s and stuff. And on Mastery 9, you get to play a card of your choice from the enemy player's deck. So yeah, this is sort of like for a more grindy, mid-rangey Paladin deck, which even if you are in Paladins, you go through all these lengths to buff your stuff with Nivea and stuff. So this is not really a Paladin card, even though it's a Paladin. But the card is kind of interesting, and at least in Expedition I've seen it played sometimes, like for example with Vishni, you play Vishni, then the next turn you play Elosh, make your 2/1 Dark Elves, 3/1 Dark Elves, stuff like that. But yeah, card is still not that great, and Ardent Port is not that impressive in Expedition anyway, so a bit of an awkward spot. Then we have Conservatory Alchemist. I actually quite like the card. I think the effect is really powerful. The problem is, to get enough out of it, you kind of pushed into playing a lot of these awkward curses that can backfire, and your deck is highly determined by a lot of cards. I tried building a deck around this in Expedition initially, and it looked pretty cool, but it just didn't end up performing very well. And in Throne, I think, yeah, the power level and it's just too high that you can play these fragile, synergistic sort of things. So yeah, while the card in a vacuum is kind of good and kind of a nice power level, in reality it just kind of falls flat, I think. And in Limited, I mean, the 2 cost 2/2 is not bad, and if you have a couple of curses, this can do some really nice things. Next we have Felrog's Choice. This card's actually really cool. First of all, we get the I don't remember the name of the Shadow card. There's a 2 cost Shadow Fast spell that basically does the negate steal part, but not the other part. So this is a straight up upgrade if you're in Feln, and makes the card a lot more playable because it's a lot less situational, because you have 2 situational modes, and more often than not you will find use for one of the 2. Especially in Expedition, this is pretty nice. Because there's Wanted Poster in Expedition and Permafrost, and Inflict Conscience, for example, to play really well with the removal part. Especially the combination of Choice and Wanted Poster is really strong. I haven't really tried messing with this in Throne, and once again, power level wise and stuff, I have my doubts that being in Justice Primal Shadow is where you want to be. But if you are, the combination of Choice and Poster alone is really powerful. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting and kind of powerful card, but once again might suffer from the issue of not having a good enough deck to end up being played much. In Limited, however, if you have a couple of curses, this becomes pretty good pretty quickly. Sorry. And we have WRetch Craven. So 3 cost 1/4 flying, and when it attacks, the enemy player discards the 2 cards of their deck. So this is kind of weird because it deals 1 to their life total and 2 to their deck. Their deck is like 45, so it needs to hit them 23 times. Like, no, not 23. Minus hand cards, blah blah blah. 15 times or something. 15, 16 times. So less than the life total at least, so it is better at pressuring their deck size than their life total. But the problem is, if this dies, a lot of the progress on the deck is gonna be irrelevant because there's not that much going on in Limited to sort of help with the mill. So if the opponent shuts this down, all the milling it did is kind of irrelevant, making the card a bit undecided. It's not good at dealing damage. It's too unreliable at milling them out. It's still a 3 cost 1/4 flyer, making it a pretty good defensive flyer. But yeah, it's bit of an odd bird, I would say. And in Constructed, I don't think it is playable in any remote way. Then we have Kindo Shadow Step, another unseen. 4 cost to 7. When any player discards a card, Kindo deals 1 damage to himself. And Mastery 13, the enemy player discards each card in their deck that shares a name with a card in their void. This is obviously another payoff for the whole trying to mill your opponent out, because there are people that like that, but it's still not good. And even if there is a deck that wants to do this, it'll probably not play this. It will just be a control deck with like a couple of Solitudes and some of the like high quality mill cards or something like that. Like, I don't know, the Mushroom maybe. And then we have Felrog, the Outcast. 6 cost 5/2, the 6 influence unit of Feln. And this is really good actually. If you have the full influence and it is discarded, you play it from your void. So the things that come to mind are stuff like the 2/1 elf that lets you draw a card and discard a card. Herald Song, Honor of the Claws, that sort of stuff. There's a whole bunch of options. This obviously also is interesting for Reanimator. It's just a really powerful card because you basically get a 0 cost 5/2 that also makes the opponent discard a card. And the milling is kind of whatever. But yeah, it's basically a 0 cost 2-for-1 if you make your deck able to enable this. And in Throne we have 16 duels to make this work. In Expedition, Feln is pretty bad and this card is hard to support, so I don't see this being relevant in Expedition. And in Limited it seems kind of underwhelming. It's hard to cast. It's even harder to get the like 0 cost 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 out of it by discarding it for free. So you're basically just gonna be picking it for the dust value mostly. And then we have Zota Arcanum, the most impactful of the new sites. 7 cost, 5 loyalty, so not that easy to kill. Still dies to Icaria though, so that's noteworthy. And yeah, when you attack with 1 or more units, you play a random power card from your deck. Noteworthy, if the power isn't depleted by itself, it will be ready, so this ramps you the turn you trigger it. Like for example, on the next turn, you need an extra power, you can attack first and then get the power to play something, unless you pull it like a crest, for example. The agenda is pretty good. The usual sequence is Convoy into Arcana, and Harmony of Flame is just really odd and kind of bad, and basically just there to give you some extra power to work with that same turn, which you often don't even have use for, and making like spells in your deck a bit cheaper when you already have tons of power. And the unit you get is fine, nothing too fancy, basically just a 5/5. The ability doesn't matter much anymore at that point a lot of the time. And yeah. So yeah, all in all, pretty good value. Quite a grindy side, but it's also an expensive side and one that is soft to Icaria. But in Throne, yeah, it's a deck, people play it. I'm not a big fan of it. But the side is definitely an interesting and strong side. Even in Expedition, people try to make it work. We did too, but yeah, I don't think there are the cards to make a deck like this work in Expedition currently. In Limited, it is obviously a powerhouse, if you are able to support it. Then we have Den of Ordeals. This contains a new unit that we don't have as a unit yet, but might get in a future set. That's the way it usually worked with sites in the past, that we kind of got spoilers through sites. Nakova and Molot, they are 8/8 flying Aegis Berserk, and on summon deal 4 damage to each enemy, and the damage can't be blocked by Aegis, and everything that dies that turn that took damage from Nakova and Molot gets void bound. So yeah, you don't need Spark or anything, but it's also a 10 drop, so once this comes out as a unit, 10 is a lot, so I don't see this seeing much play when it comes out as a unit, if it does, which it probably will. But yeah, we get a 6 cost, 4 loyalty unit, site. The site is mainly there for the unit. The spells are not very strong. At the start of your turn, you create and draw a treasure trove for each different name among your dragons. That's actually a fairly powerful effect in the right deck. If you have a dragon or two in play, this is already better than any of the spells. And the spells are pretty weak. Basically get the turn you play it, get to deal 3 to a unit to protect the side a bit and scout. Tail on dive doesn't even do much, like you want to protect your side, and even if you don't, you just get to like deal 2 extra damage or something with an attacker, because combat tricks at non-fast speed are pretty underwhelming. And yeah, the end is near is usually what you go for second, making sure you don't draw any more power. But this can also be a downside. If you need to draw more power, then you want to like try and delay it. But yeah, not drawing power for probably the remainder of the game is kind of nice incremental advantage. But yeah, the side so far mostly fallen flat after initial hype of people, and I'm not very impressed with it. I tried it in some ideas like Felonscar and Throne, or Felonscar Dragon Heavy in Expedition. Both didn't really perform very well. In Limited, any side is pretty good though if you can play it, so that's still a strong card. Then we have Outcast Fortress. Oh, I just realized I completely forgot to turn this on. Let's check. Did I forget anything? Nope. Alright, good. Profane Nexus. Yeah, the Fire Time Shadow Sight. This is a pretty interesting one. It's obviously built like 3 faction sacrifice deck. When you sacrifice a unit, you deal 1 damage to the enemy player and you gain 1. As a payoff, you get a free Obrak the Feaster, and all 3 spells require you to sacrifice a unit. So the problem here is you need a lot of units, like fodder units, to fuel this, but Soul's Fury and Devour are really good payoffs. Last Rites is a bit underwhelming, but sometimes you might play this and Last Rites first to set up, I don't know, like a Carve It or some other 6-drop the next turn, or multiple plays. So the side and its effects are quite powerful. The problem, once again, I think, is that the good sacrifice deck just wants to be Xenon. So making this kind of a good card that probably doesn't end up having a deck once again. But yeah, it's one of the better and more interesting sides of the new sides, I would say. Then we have the Time Justice Primal Sight. Yeah, your units can't be silenced on a 5-cost side. Kind of underwhelming. 5 loyalty, 5 durability is fine. The effects, however, are pretty narrow and weak. Twinning Ritual, underwhelming, basically means you draw like a slightly better version of a unit in your hand, if you have a unit in your hand. So if you don't, the card's not even doing anything. Safe Return, awkward, you don't really want to reduce your board size usually, because you want to protect your side, and also the effect of Safe Return is awkward. And Vision of Austerity is very situational. It's basically a narrower, more powerful version of Meltdown on Garden of Omens. And yeah, Genetrix is also kind of a weird payoff of such a slow side. Also, if you don't have a unit in play, Genetrix is going to look pretty weak. So I think the side is really weak and really bad in so many ways that the card is pretty useless. In Limited, it's still fine because it's a side and all, but even for a side, it's a pretty bad side in Limited. Then we have Outcast Fortress. Your curses cost 1 less, which can give you some nice tempo with like Permafrost, for example. It's cheap and still has 3 durability, making it a pretty decent side, and you get some value out of it. Pilfer means you get an extra card, even though from your opponent's deck. Cruelty, yeah, it's pretty awkward, because you basically have to decimate most of the time to get something out of it, really. So this is like the weakest effect. And Protect is just decent. You can give yourself an Aegis or your best unit and make it harder for the opponent to take down the site. And then the unit you get is Xelia the Vayne, which is actually a pretty strong unit, especially in like a longer game where activated ability can really take over the game, make her a really big threat, and also cripple your opponent heavily. So it's a decent site. In Throne, it's too gimmicky. In Expedition, it's a bit more interesting, but still not quite there. And in Limited, it's pretty powerful. If you get Xelia out of it, it's just gonna win you the game. And we have Ancient Manual. It's a depleted power that gains you influence in a faction you don't already have. So basically it's a worse version of Diplomatic Seal. Sure, it functions a bit differently, but it's depleted and isn't much better at what it does. So all in all, I don't see this being played and constructed. In Limited, it's a decent fixer, I guess. Then we have Sacred Seal, colorless source that gives you 1 health. Technically interesting for Life Force stuff, but Life Force is bad. Also, if you are Life Force, you're probably influence heavy enough in Xenon that you don't really want to afford this, especially because it also hurts your Waystones. So yeah, just a weak card, I think. Then we have Varret, Hero in Training, one of the powerhouses in Expedition, in any like proactive deck with units. And even in Throne, the card pops up here and there because it's pretty solid, especially if you can help it mastery faster, since its mastery modes are really strong. And in Limited, a 2-cost 2/3 alone is pretty solid, and the mastery is super powerful, so it's a great card in Limited too. And last we have Sword of Judgment, mostly a limited card really, but in Limited it's decent. You slap this on like a medium-sized flyer and you quickly have a pretty big flyer. It's still a weapon, so you can still get 2 for 1, but basically with a bit of a delay, getting +5/+5 for 4 and factionless is still pretty solid, so I think more often than not this will end up making your deck rather than not. So yeah, that's it. We've finally managed to go over all the cards once again. Really sorry that this took forever. I'll do my best to do better next set. Me getting sick made it even worse. But yeah, I hope you guys still enjoyed the series. Let me know in the comments what you think. And yeah, you know the drill. Subscribe, turn on notifications, leave a like if you enjoy the content, and so on and so forth. And as usual, don't forget to whitelist YouTube on your adblock or turn off your adblock to help support your favorite content creators. And that's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.